First speaker is Linda O'Neill. Linda comes from Castletown Bear in West Cork and now lives in County Waterford. After graduating through CIT and the Farm Apprenticeship Board, she worked on large-scale farms in New Zealand for 2 years. She returned to Ireland to transform and manage the Mount Melleray Abbey farm and transformed it from a high-cost, all-year-round calving system into a very efficient grass-based system of farming there. She now works with LIC as I was going to say in my original bio a consultant, but I've decided that she is now someone who calls to farms and gets action happening and holds people accountable. So Linda is going to present on the 6-week challenge.
Thanks, Pat, for giving me my introduction. So I'll just get straight into it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Positives farmers for asking me to speak here today on what I call the 8 ingredients of the fertility cake, or the amount of fertility that you control inside your own farm gate. And it's a huge amount, as you'll see when we get into it. So lifting profits through improved 6-week and calf rates. That's what we're going to focus on here today. And it's for you to take home a couple of clear messages and how you can do that inside your own farm gate. First of all, we'll discuss the objective of the 6-week and calf rate. Why the 6-week and calf rate? Why is it so important? Why should you consider this as a main KPI for your farm business? 8 aspects, as I just said previously, to achieving the 6-week targets. And each of you have a book there today with the proceedings, and my slides are inside in it. So there's one important slide that I'd like you all to get a pen in your hand and focus on as we're going to go into it. And we'll just be ready. It's called the 8 ingredients of the fertility cake, but just to have that page open. How to measure it here in Ireland. And see, we have a lot of farmers here from the UK as well. It also can be done over there. And taking the 6-week challenge here in Ireland. Finally, we'll summarise what we've gone through. Objectives. The knowledge that the 6-week and calf rate is in fact the greatest measure of on-farm profitability, or a main KPI for your business. And discussing with discussion groups and dealing with individual clients, there can be a little bit of confusion in terms of 6-week and calf rate and 6-week and calving rate. We're actually talking about 2 different scenarios here. Your 6-week and calf rate is the percentage of cows that have gone in calf in the first 6 weeks of your breeding season. And your 6-week calving rate is the percentage of cows calving in the first 6 weeks of your calving period, when heifers have been front-loaded into the business. So there's quite a difference in both of those. Take home 2 key areas to target on improving your 6-week and calf rate. There's 8 ingredients of the fertility cake, and Rome wasn't built in a day, but if there's 2 areas there, what I call areas of opportunity for you to take home and focus on over the next 12 months, you'll make vast improvement on your own home farm. Why the 6-week and calf rate? Why is it so important? It's a consistent measure between herds. When you go to your local discussion group, what's often discussed back in the autumn time of the year is your empty rate. To me, that's actually a measure of the past. It is an important one, but there is quite a variation within empty rate, because for example, if we take 2 farm scenarios, Farmer A and Farmer B, Farmer A could do a 12-week breeding period and achieve a 6-week empty rate, okay? Farmer B could do 9 weeks breeding period and achieve a 15% empty rate, just for figure's sake. So it's not comparing apples with apples, that's the big one. Whereas 6-week and calf rate, regardless of when you started your breeding period, it's the percentage of cows that have gone in calf in the first 6 weeks, so you can compare like with like. And I believe that's a key measure that we need to start discussing in discussion groups going forward. Point of greatest variation within herds. From the graph here, we can see that there's quite a variation in terms of 6-week and calf rate being achieved on farm, right down to about 35%, up to high achievers of near enough to 80%. And industry target for your 6-week in calf rate before heifers are front loaded into the business for the following season is 78% of your cows going calf in the first 6 weeks of your breeding period. So as you can see, there's quite a variation, and dealing with individual clients and discussion groups, I would see nationally figures, if I took the average of farmers that I'm visiting and working with, we'd be sitting somewhere in or around 50% here nationally on a 6-week in-calf rate. It drives empty rate. We do know there's 3 key main areas to a successful breeding season. First of all, it's submission rate, then conception rate, 6-week in-calf rate, and followed by a better empty rate. If you're achieving a high 6-week in-calf rate for your herd of 78%, that's only 22% of your herd left to go on calf after the second 6 weeks. So you should be driving a better empty rate at the end of the breeding season. It's the halfway point in the race against time, and I'll mention the race against time quite a lot as we go on here today. Most breeding periods on average are about 12 weeks, so 6 weeks is the halfway in the race against time. Financial benefits to your business. And this is the key area. When I'll go into any dairy farmer, he's always going to say, well, how much money is this going to leave in my pocket at the end of the season? And I'm taking a 100-cow herd here as an example. A 10% improvement in 6-week in-calf rate, which is quite a drastic improvement really, but 10% is more easily achieved if a farmer is in around 50-60%. As a farmer is over 70% in his 6-week in-calf rate, the higher you get to the top of the stairs, the steps will be a little bit smaller. But we're just taking 10% for simple maths as an example. And this is what that €2,500 is in terms of days and milk to you. So if you could improve your 6-week in-calf rate in the 2015 breeding season by 10%, that's days and milk in 2016. As I discussed a while ago, a 6-week in-calf rate is going to give you an improved empty rate at the end of the breeding season. So in terms of a gap calculator, you have to combine both figures together. This is the difference between you selling a cull cow at the end of the breeding season or giving you more choice, more profit to the business of being able to sell in-calf animals. And the difference will be in around €3,000. Combine both of those together, there's over €5,750 up for grabs by a 10% improvement in 6-week in-calf rate and a 5% reduction in empty rate. And you can do the maths on your own herds, but that's on a 100-cow herd, what I have done there. The race against time clock. Here, on this goes through your whole herd pattern and how your actual herd is set up in a spring calving situation. On the outer side of it here, we've got gestation length, okay? And on average, a cow spends in around 282 days pregnant. As we go down into the more detailed area, which is the calving period, roughly on average 83 days, and we look at how cows in your herd slot in at different times of the year. After that, we then have the mating period, and we're back to the start again. So every cow within your herd, believe it or not, she's in a constant race against time to make money for you. If we look at the outer part of this section here, we have the cows that calve in the first 3 weeks. And these are the cows that are really setting you up for a good breeding season, because those cows in that orange circle, as you can see here, have 2 practiced heats before you actually ever inseminate the cow. And on average, a cow's second or subsequent heat is going to be in around 15 to 18% increased fertility than her first heat. So the more practice heats a cow has before you inseminate her, there's huge advantage on conception rates. Then we look at cows who are calving in the second 3 weeks of your calving period. They have 1 practiced heat, which is still a good advantage in terms of her being set up before the breeding season. And she's still got 2 chances to get in calf in the first 6 weeks. As we go further on, we see cows fitting into another pattern, which are the cows calving after the first 6 weeks. And these cows here, in first of all, the purple line, their first cycle is actually happening when you're starting to breed your cows, okay? So they are in a race against time in terms of conception rate and getting pregnant in the first 6 weeks of your breeding period. Then we have these girls that are calving late, or late calvers, which they're in every herd across the country. What can we do with these in terms of management factors? We'll discuss later in trying to retain them on in the business. But they're actually only having their first practice heat in the second 3 weeks of your breeding period. And those cows with fertility being a little bit lower, they're probably going to struggle to fit into your calving pattern. If you're going to cut off at a 12-week breeding season, they probably won't go on calf in the first 6 weeks. So these are the problem cows within our herds. So as I said, every cow in your herd is in a race against time. It takes on average a cow 42 days to recover from calving to first cycle. So it's minimising the effects there on that as well, as we discuss when we go further on. What does a high 6-week in calf rate going to deliver to your business? First of all, as I said a while ago, in terms of improvement, you're going to get more days in milk, more AI replacements. So if you're driving a higher 6-week in calf rate, there's less cows going calf to the stock bull, so more AI replacements. Better empty rate at the end of the breeding season. And the big one is tighter mating and calving periods. Huge on farm to be finished calving before you actually start breeding. It's very hard to deal with the two tasks and get good performance on both. So I would say in an ideal world, and that's calving pattern, which we'll discuss further, finish calving before you start breeding. All that is more choice, more sustainability, and involve more profit. So the 8 key areas of impact are what I call the 8 ingredients of what is a fertility cake. If you could all of you open that page now, and as I'll go along, what I'd like you to do is rate yourself on how you feel you're performing on your own business. 1 being there's room for a lot of improvement in that area, and 5 being that you're performing quite well, you're reaching all the main targets. And if you're unsure of any of these without your herd records, just write a few notes or give yourself a few pointers on how you can analyse that when you go home to your own herd records. First of all, we've got calving pattern, then we'll discuss replacement, heifer management, nutrition, body condition score, heat detection, dealing with bulls after the AI period, AI practices and genetics, dealing with non-cycler cows, and finally cow health. So if you could find 1 or 2 areas here where you want to focus on for the next 12 months, you will find vast improvement on farm. First of all, calving pattern. So what I would say to you here, are you achieving 90% of your cows calving in the first 6 weeks? Are you finished calving before you start breeding? These are all questions to ask yourself on how you're performing on calving pattern. We do know that cows calving later, spread out calving patterns going to equal less days of milk. You just can't make up that production at the end of the season, what you miss out in the start of the season. For every month you lose, if cow calving in April versus a cow calving in February, we're talking around between 80 and 90 kilos of milk solids lost for the April cow versus the February cow. Fewer AI replacements if you've got a spread out calving pattern. There will be more animals in your herd going calf to the stock bull at that stage, those later calving cows. Poor reproductive performance. Lower submission rate driving conception rate. Are you achieving 90% submission rate in the first 3 weeks of the breeding period? And if not, we must look for the underlying cause of what's causing that. Lower 6-week in calf rate compared to other people in your discussion group. How are you performing? And a higher empty rate at the end of the breeding season. Are you achieving poorer empty rates? So this graph here looks at calving to mating start date in terms of week and what impact that has on the 6-week in calf rate. And I've drawn a line here in terms of where we are 6 weeks down the track. If you look at cows calving 13 weeks out before you actually start breeding, those girls that have more practice heats before you ever serve them, the highest 6-week in calf rates, okay? So cows calving in the first 6 weeks of your calving pattern, those girls are well set up by the time breeding time comes around. And what's interesting is the steep decline on the right-hand side here of cows calving after the first 6 weeks. Just not enough practice heats, and they're actually going to struggle to go on calf in the first 6 weeks. Now we'll go on to discuss heifer management, and this is an area where I see there's a lot of opportunity on farm for improvement here. So what I would say to you here, questions to ask yourself, do you weigh your heifers? Number 1, how many people here would weigh their heifers? It's good, quite a good show of hands, that's good to see. And do we know the targets along the way as well? We need to be achieving 30% of mature live weight at 6 months, 60% of mature live weight at 15 months, and 90% of mature live weight at 22 months of age. Hugely important targets to consider along the way. So for these young animals, when they're coming into your herd, you can use some measures here to identify how they're performing and to see if you're actually up to speed on reaching target weights. So for the 2 and 3-year-olds, so your first calvers coming into the herd, and those other at-risk group, as I call them, heifers have done 1 lactation and calving down as second calvers. These are parts of herds where I see there's an area for a lot of opportunity in terms of improving that, because there's too many of them falling out of the system too early. Morpark tells us on average it's costing us in around €1,500 to rear a replacement heifer, so she needs to stay on in your herd for you to get a return down the track. She's possibly even halfway through her second lactation before you're starting to see a return. So are these animals, the young animals in your herd, presenting a slow calving pattern? Do you have lower 3-week submission rates compared to the mature cows in your herd? Lower 6-week and calf rates? Or is there a high percentage of these animals ending up as lates or empties at the end of the breeding season? Poor milk production performance, how are they actually performing compared to what they should do? A heifer on her first lactation should on average do a minimum of 75% of a mature cow in your herd. So from milk recording records, that's a very simple calculation to figure out how are the heifers performing within your herd compared to where they should be. So what's all that worth to us? This is some information that I've got from the National Herd Fertility Study that was done in New Zealand 2 years ago, and it was based on 12,000 heifers, okay? And they looked at getting heifers here, we'll go with the first part of it, getting heifers from 80% to 100% of target. So these heifers are 20% behind where they should be. And that 20% behind where they should be, what is that? What is that in terms of a loss to a farmer's business? Calving interval on into second lactation, we're going to lose over 4 days, okay? As these animals are under more pressure, still growing, they've calved down, they're in a production system now. There's a lot of stress on them without being behind as well. 3-week submission rates down on average about 5% for those animals as well. And a 6-week and calf rate reduction again, the main thing we're talking about here today. So they're the fertility losses of having a heifer 20% behind where she should be. And let's look at the milk production side of what we're losing. I don't talk too much in terms of litres, I'll talk in terms of kilos of milk solids. If your heifer is 20% behind where she should be, you're losing about 35 kilos of milk solids in her first lactation. That's quite a lot to be letting behind you. If you look at heifers getting from 90% to 100% to target, I'm not going to go through all the figures, you just half it, okay? So that 10% is half of what the other figures were. But there's one line I would actually summarise that slide on, and it's actually for every 1% behind a heifer is in terms of being at target weight, you're going to lose 2 kilos of milk solids in her first lactation. So for 1% behind where she should be, that's 2 kilos of milk solids lost. So there's huge benefits in getting those heifers up to target weight and getting them into the herd at the right weight. What's interesting figure from that herd fertility study that was done in New Zealand on those 12,000 heifers, 70% of them were behind where they should have been. That's a startling figure. Nutrition and body condition score. What I would ask you here is how many people in the audience actually body condition score their cows? Okay, good. A little bit less than weighing heifers, and that's what I'm seeing on farm when I will go around as well. Hugely important to body condition score your cows. Body condition score has a huge impact on herd fertility, all the management factors that you can do. So we need to body condition score our cows on average about 4 times a year, and 2 targets would be calving down at a body condition score of 3.2 for mature cows, but actually 3.5 for in-calf heifers and second calvers as well. Those second calvers need to calve down at the same condition score as a heifer in your herd coming into second lactation. And you need to be in around 2.8, 2.9 at breeding time on condition score. Is condition score impacting your herd in terms of lower 6-week and calf rate? Is there a higher percentage of empties at the end of the breeding season, actually lower body condition score cows? It's amazing when I get farmers to actually analyse their figures, we'd look into, it's always the why. Why are these cows empty? And if you go out and body condition score, on average, it's probably one of the biggest impacts at empty cows at the end of the breeding season. Lower submission rates and conception rates and fewer AI replacements, as we said earlier, due to those cows actually not submitting themselves and not getting a good conception rate. Less days of milk. There's quite a lot of production being traded off in terms of cows not calving down at the correct condition score. You're probably losing in or around 10 to 15 kilos of milk solids for a cow that's about a quarter behind condition score at calving than where she should be. And the other thing is about 9 or 10 days later cycling as well. So condition score will have a huge impact on fertility performance. 2 and 3-year-old animals, and getting back to these again, the first calvers, the second calvers, if they're not at the correct condition score, they're in a high stress environment already coming into the herd. They need to be managed, condition score hugely important. So if we look at body condition score and how it's actually, put some figures on it and how it's impacting your 6-week and calf rate. Down here at the bottom is a New Zealand condition score, okay, but I'll just give you one figure on conversion. At a New Zealand condition score of 5, and this is a pre-calving body condition score, 5 is equivalent to our 3.2 here in Ireland, okay? So that's your optimum body condition score at calving. And you can see over here, cows less than 3 or less than our 2 here in Ireland, the lowest 6-week in calf rates. It's ranging from about 45% up to 65%. But as you can see, as condition score is increasing, the main message is conception rate and 6-week in calf rate is improving. But what's interesting to the right of that is cows, and I would see these on herds as I'm going around the country, these over-fat condition scored cows due to quota management this year. They will also present quite a lot of problems in your herds in terms of managing those cows. They need to be, actually, it's a little bit late now in terms of dry cow management, but you would need to put correct procedures in place for those to managing. It's probably to avoid huge weight losses after they calve. I have a slide here from Lincoln University Dairy Farm in the South Island in New Zealand. And what this looks at, the whole herd was professionally body condition scored at the start of calving. And we've got 4 categories in condition score. Cows that are under condition score 4, this is probably the red line is the real clear message, or the warning line, is cows under condition score 2 at calving. And in or around this point here, I'll just leave the cursor on it, is the 6-week in calf rate, okay? And what you can see up along is those cows, lower submission rate. But what amazes me is just like 6-week in calf rate is poor, but they never caught up, and empty rate compared to cows that were on target at the end of the breeding season was quite poor. This green line here is a category which a lot of you would have within your own herds. Those cows that are slightly behind, is she where she should be, or how is she actually tipping along? Those cows submit themselves reasonably well, but 6-week in calf rate and conception rate is poor on those cows if they're not at the correct body condition score. Yes, they have caught up at the end of the breeding season in terms of empty rate, but 6-week in calf rate is poor compared to the cows that are on target. Heat detection. So if we look at heat detection as a measure, as another ingredient of the cake, hugely important. We're all in an expanding dairy industry, a lot of young staff coming onto farms. Are they competent in what they're doing? It's hugely important they're up to speed. So the pre-breeding period is a fantastic time in terms of when you can take your staff out into the paddock and actually train them in heat detection, because it's a job probably a number of farmers have been doing themselves for a good number of years, know all the signs, know what to look for, but do your staff know it? Hugely important. The day you start inseminating a cow is too late. You need to start doing it in the pre-breeding period. A missed heat is costing roughly around €200 in terms of you missing a heat on farm, so quite a loss. Invented heats, is she on, isn't she on? This is always the question of what farmers would ask, and in terms of deciding whether a cow is in heat or not. Herd records, hugely important, to look back and actually see, was she inseminated before? How long is it since her last insemination? The more information you have to hand, the clearer you can make a decision on whether you should serve that cow or not. Second round slump is very common on farms. Heat detection lasts for the whole breeding period, not just for the first 3 weeks. And there is no difference in herd size, funnily enough. We do know big herds face different challenges, but there is no difference in herd size. Here I have a graph that looks at a farmer that has targeted himself in terms of his pregnancy rate and what he actually achieved, okay? So if you look at the blue line is what he achieved and the red line was what he targeted. We can see here for the first 3 weeks, which is right up to this point here, he got on very well, okay? Achieved his target, done very well. But something happened here in the second 3 weeks. And when I asked this farmer what actually went on here, we looked into it, and off-farm commitments just took him away from the job. But he was pretty disgusted when he realised that he actually didn't achieve his 6-week in calf rate of 75%. What's interesting is what he lost, he never regained. You can see here, right up to the end of the breeding season, his target was around 8% empty rate, but it ended up being about nearly 85% of his cows and calf, not 92% of his cows and calves. So what he lost, he never regained. So that's heat detection. It lasts for the whole breeding period. Now we're over the AI period and we're on to the bull management within your own farm. So what I would say to you is, how many bulls do you need to actually cover your cows after your insemination period? And it's a simple calculation in terms of conception rate, submission rate by conception rate. You need to calculate how many cows are still open in your herd before you put the bulls in, okay? How much bull power do you need? On average, about 1 per 25, 30 cows, not in calf, and you do need to rotate those bulls. Very, very important. Another one, we had some great information on animal health yesterday. If you have a good animal health status in your herd and you're buying in bulls, be sure and know what their health status is before you mix them with your own herd. It's detrimental if you have a lot of good work done and you're buying in bulls and you don't know their health status. Hugely important. Another one I would add to that is, if you're buying in 1 or 2 bulls, know their fertility status. Get them fertility tested, okay? Hugely important, because you're depending on those. So do you find, when you're analysing your records compared to the AI period, is there poor performance during the natural mating period, and why? Do you have enough bull power? Are you rotating their bulls, and their health status as well? Do you know that? Is disease introduction, I've just discussed that. BVD, all the health issues with bulls as well. Hugely important to know that before you mix them with your herd. Here I have a graph that looks at how the natural mating period went on a herd. And this farmer has just chose to do 5 weeks of AI, okay? And that's right at that point where I have the cursor on it there at the moment. He achieved his performance, done very well over the AI period, but something went wrong after week 5 when the bulls went in, and he didn't achieve his 6-week in calf rate target, but right again to the end of the breeding season, the gap even widened further, okay? So when I sat down, analysed this information, this farmer did not have enough bull power on his farm. He'd done 5 weeks of AI. In the past, had probably done in around 7 or 8 weeks, and he didn't allow for the amount of cows that were still open. Bulls couldn't cope with it, lameness set in, other health issues, and he ended up with quite a high empty rate at the end of the breeding season. So know where your herd is positioned after you've finished your AI period before the bulls go in. Hugely important. AI practices and genetics. If you look at genetics and the contribution to fertility, okay, in the BW in New Zealand, there's about a 9% variation in terms of the amount of fertility that genetics will contribute to your business, okay? So in around 90% of it would be management, 9% would be the genetic part of it. Do you breed from carryover cows? This would be another question to ask yourself. Empty cows at the end of last year's breeding season, are they being held on? And actually, a question I'd ask you, what are you actually breeding those cows to? Are you breeding them to dairy, or are you breeding them to beef? Because if she's a problem cow, do you really want a daughter of hers in your herd going forward? AI practices and genetics. How many farmers here are DIY operators? Okay, quite a good few of you in the audience. I'd say about 50% as well. For DIY operators, believe it or not, you are one of the 8 ingredients of the fertility cake as well, okay? So you have quite a part to play in that. And you do not get the same exposure compared to a technician on an AI run doing 3,000 to 5,000 cows on average. You're a farmer, you're trying to measure grass, you're trying to mine cow health, you're watching young stock. You have 101 jobs to do in any one day. So be sure you're competent at your job before you actually start inseminating those cows. And a farmer would often say to me, should I do a refresher course? If you're asking yourself that question, go and do a refresher course before you ever start inseminating a cow. Get some exposure to it. Hugely important that you're competent in what you do, because in the first 3 weeks, you don't want to actually have poor performance if you've got a good submission rate because of you being a poorer in the AI side of it. Do you follow the actual correct procedure of handling and storing a semen and all that goes with that? That all goes through the refresher course. Just make sure you're up to speed yourself and all that. Hugely important. Next, we'll deal with non-cyclers. So we've got into the breeding season, or just looking at how we will deal with non-cyclers at this stage. This is always a very interesting debate and different opinions on what way we should approach this in discussion groups. So 3-week submission rate. Is your 3-week submission rate below 90% for your herd? Do you have more than 15% of your herd sitting as non-cyclers at the start of the breeding season? And if you are doing treatments, what percentage of treatments or what percentage of non-cycler activity is going on in your herd? Ideally, we shouldn't be seeing more than 20% of the herd sitting there as non-cyclers. We need to look for the underlying cause if there's more than 20% there. And I'm not an advocate of intervention and treatment. It's prevention is better than cure would be my rule of thumb, okay? Look for the underlying cause. We don't want to be going in with all these fancy medicines and treatments just to fix another problem that will still be there next season. Top quartile of farmers, so top performers achieving pretty good KPIs in their business. They would be doing less intervention than poorer performers, but they're probably still doing a little bit of it to achieve targets. So if we do treat these non-cyclers, when should we treat them? Should we treat them 3-4 weeks into the breeding season, if they are there, or when should we actually look at them? So I have a graph here that looks at timing of non-cycler treatments and its relevance to 6-week in calf rate. So if you look over here to the left, we've got 6-week in calf rate. This is treating your non-cyclers before you actually ever inseminate a cow. So treating them early. Farmers say to me, sure, how will I actually go about that? A simple plan. I'm going to be doing heat detection through the whole breeding period. I don't want to be doing it before I start as well. I'll just lose interest. Very simple methods in doing that. Tail paint your whole herd a month before you start breeding. No need to be writing down numbers or recording. If you actually just top up the cows that haven't got the paint rubbed off and get them looked at a week before you start breeding. So if you do that a month before you start, you've got a window of 6 to 7 days before you actually ever start inseminating a cow to look at those cows with tail paint still on them. And they might, simple treatments, maybe even once a day milking to actually get condition score correct, but get someone in to look at them. But if, as I said earlier, if you have a high percentage, look for that underlying cause. If we look further on, treating them in and around the first 3 weeks, 6-week in calf rate is reducing as we're delaying in time of treatment. Because if you treat early, those cows that you've treated before mating start date, you're giving them 2 chances to go on calf in the first 6 weeks. But if you delay and the period runs on, there's less chances to go on calf in the first 6 weeks. Just like the cows out here treated probably in week 4 of your breeding season, they've only got 1 chance to go on calf in the first 6 weeks. So you're ruling out a lot. So my message should be, if they're there, treat them early. But if you have a high incidence, look deeper, look for the underlying cause. Why is that happening? Cow health. And we had a lot of information on cow health here yesterday, which was fantastic. But cow health, as farmers that have had issues, it's important only at a herd level if a high percentage of your cows are actually affected. If there's a BVD outbreak or other diseases like we heard yesterday, yes, it's going to have quite an impact on your herd. All illnesses impact, okay? But particularly are uterine infections, metabolic diseases, lameness, quite an impact on fertility as well. And what I would say to you is, if you have a high incidence of any of these, get your vet involved. As Colin said earlier, they have a fantastic relationship with your vet, and that should be the case on every farm, not to phone the vet up when there's a problem. Get him in during the year and sit down and do the prevention rather than the cure method with your vet tailored to your own herd. So we look at 6-week in calf rate and what impact health issues can have on that. So a high portion of the herd are healthy, no major issues. 6-week in calf rate really won't be infected. What's very interesting here is calving difficulty or hard calvings. As I said earlier, it takes a cow about 42 days to recover from a normal calving. But if she has a difficult calving and if she's not looked after and managed to try and get her up to speed again, it's going to have quite an impact on your 6-week in calf rate, under 55%. Endometritis, cows with uterine infections and all that, get them looked at early, okay? Be on top of it. Don't just wait until you actually start inseminating the cows. It's all the race against time. Get your cows right before you start breeding. Mastitis, not a huge impact. If you had E. coli outbreaks and other issues like that, yeah, they're going to impact, but generally mastitis wouldn't have a huge impact in terms of 6-week in calf rate. What's interesting here from the National Herd Fertility Study, lameness is actually not down here. There is other health issues as well in terms of fluke, worms. We could go on for the day on them, but they're harder to measure and record. So lameness, if a high incidence of your herd is lame, you need to look into them and get it right, because it would have quite an impact on the breeding season as well. So as we've gone through the 8 ingredients of the cake, hopefully I gave you a couple of seconds to write down a couple of notes. I know I skipped through them, but I'm going to summarise now again, and it'll help you to actually do your scorecard here. Calving pattern. We discussed calving pattern first. Are you achieving 90% of your cows calving in the first 6 weeks? And when you look through your herd profile, is there cows, actually the younger cows, performing poor? The fertility reports on Herd Plus here in Ireland are fantastic in terms of analysing individual lactations within your own herd. If you haven't already done so, go home, pull out your final fertility report from last season and turn to the second page, and it'll give you how each lactation animal in your herd performed in terms of 6-week in calf rate and empty rate. You can dig a bit deeper into it. Heifer management. Are you weighing? Do you know the targets? And as I said, for every 1% closer a heifer is to target, that's 2 kilos of milk solids in her first lactation. We're all on about expansion and increasing production. I'm talking about what's inside your own farm gate. There's a lot up for grabs there. Nutrition and body condition score, impacts that can have on fertility. Once a day milking, simple stuff. Get cows, but the key is get her calving down at the correct condition score. That is huge. Otherwise, you're going to have to do once a day milking or playing catch up. but get her right when she's calving down. Heat detection, expanding herds. We know there's challenges there. Larger herds face different challenges. But if you have staff on board in the expanding farm, make sure they know exactly what you're trying to achieve, and that every heat that they are going to miss, or you're going to miss yourself too, not just them, is going to cost you about €200. Bulls. Have your bulls' fertility checked. Get their herd health status right if your own is correct. Do not buy in bulls that you do not know their herd health status, and rotate those bulls. And hugely important, have enough bull power after the AI period. AI practices and genetics, we discussed here about the DIY operators, and you are actually an ingredient to the cake. So if you feel you need to do a refresher course, go out there and get it done after the calving period and be up to speed by the start of AI. Dealing with non-cyclers, clear message here is treat them early to get a high 6-week in calf rate, but if you have a high incidence, you need to look for that underlying cause. And finally, we looked at cow health and the impact that has at herd health level, and calving difficulty being one of the big ones. It's managing when a cow calves to first service is to get her up to speed and get her in there and timing and early. So hopefully from that, you've scored yourself. Take it home tonight, dig a little bit deeper into your records, and pick 1 or 2 areas there to focus on for the next year. When you have them achieved, go on to the next area. So, from working with farmers over the last 18 months around the country, how do you actually go about all this? I've talked about all the ingredients of the cake, and you're like, well, where do I start, you know? There is some great information being used there that us as LIC consultants working with dairy farmers, we've been doing audits with farmers, okay? And late lactation, believe it or not, when you're closing off your pastures, that's when you're starting. Last October, when you closed your first paddock, you closed down your herd in line with it. That's when you were protecting 2015 6-week in calf rate. So late lactation, we would go through on farm, individually with farmers, do an audit, put a plan in place, the farmer does it, and the review process will be, what can we do better for next season? So I work on the process of plan, do, and review. Huge, simple procedures, and it goes through four audits on farm, late lactation, pre-calving, pre-breeding, and mid-lactation as well. And there's a full help booklet to go with that. So getting back to what the money in your pocket would be, we said 10% improved 6-week in calf rate, 5% improved empty rate, in or around €5,750 to you. There are other benefits, okay, that are probably harder to quantify, but they're huge benefits to your business. More AI replacements, okay? So more culling choices at the end of the season. It's amazing how much rapid genetic gain every farmer in this audience could do if they get a high 6-week in calf rate, a good empty rate, to remove the bottom 5% of their herd every year. That, you will believe it or not, that is the fastest route to genetic gain. Replacements born early, calving pattern, that gets back to if they're born early, they're not playing the catch-up game. In every farm, we always see those April calves, they just struggle, you know, in terms of the amount of input they have to get to actually calve down at the correct weight. Finish calving before you start breeding. If you're at any one job, calve them first, then breed them. That is key. It's very hard to do 2 jobs and reach targets together. And it's labour efficiencies as well going forward on that point. And less bulls required for the mating period as well, if you're getting good results in terms of 6-week in calf rate. And on a side to that, on safety on farms, you know, there's been a lot of accidents on farms over the last 12 months, and the less bulls you have on farms, the better. And it's a reduced cost to your business as well. So in summary, and what we've discussed here today, 6-week in calf rate, yes, I believe, and I hope you have taken the message, it is a key and it's a huge measure for you, your business, or a main KPI for your business going forward in terms of farm profitability. It can be measured here in Ireland. We have heard fertility reports from Herd Plus, excellent information, plenty to dig deep into, and actually what I would say is put a stick in the sand. This is where you are today. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time, and how do we fill the gap in between? Pretty simple, but it's a clear roadmap to the end result. It requires a year-round approach to actually to get good fertility within your herd. It's not just the day you actually inseminate the first cow that you're actually starting to, you know, improve your 6-week in calf rate. It's a year-round approach. And there is no silver bullet, unfortunately. There's 8 ingredients to the cake. Each one of them is as important as the other, okay? So it's not just one point. And assistance is available through the consultancy service if anyone needs so. Finally, I leave you on one quote by Robert Louis Stevenson. And it's don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. Thanks very much.